for our country.
Mike Sabin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I too am very pleased to speak to this report and inquiry. I think right across this House we would all acknowledge the very important work that was done in this report and the difficulties that are confronted by all of the professionals, as well as indeed the young people at the centre of this inquiry. Mr Speaker, it is a very, very challenging area, and I just want to commend the committee for commissioning this report and the Honourable Chester Burrows for his involvement in that. I think it is work that is worthwhile doing and indeed is very much a moving environment in terms of addressing the challenges. One of the most challenging features, Mr Speaker, certainly as a former policeman I can speak to this with some degree of understanding, is the multitude of risk factors and protective factors that are faced by these young people. And Mr Speaker, I'd just like to turn to the report just to actually read some specific information related to that on page 13, risk and protective factors. We understand that a number of widely recognised factors put children at risk of offending. They include associated antisocial behaviour on conduct disorders, mental health problems, suicidal behaviour, drug and alcohol use, poor academic performance and truancy, poor health, poor attachment to family and low self-esteem. Mr Speaker, the report goes on to outline a number of other factors that are environmental factors that are also at play here. Some of them dysfunction in family situation, abuse within the family and violence, parents with a history of mental illness and drug and alcohol abuse, and poor parenting. Mr Speaker, the report also goes on to outline what they have learnt about protective factors and which reduce the likelihood of children offending. And some of these key factors were supervision and monitoring by parents with reasonable and consistent rules and consequences. Mr Speaker, this is something that is a common thread within youth offending, that the lack of engagement, the lack of parental oversight often sees children of the age of 10 to 13 wandering the streets in trouble. And indeed, Mr Speaker, this is something that I have endeavoured to address by way of a private member's bill that looks at the importance of the relationship between a child offender and their parents. This member's bill, which is currently in the ballot, would actually provide youth court judges with the ability to put a parent or guardian that is entrusted the custody of that young person under conditions which may in fact, such as curfew, such as a residence clause, such as not to use drugs and alcohol, so on and so forth, so that as the youth court is endeavouring to deal with these young people, Mr Speaker, that they can also be assured that they can get engagement with the parents where the circumstances are indeed appropriate. The report actually goes on to make recommendations of a similar nature actually right through to the family court, where we are indeed dealing with the 10 to 13-year-old child offenders who will only actually be in front of a judge or in about 10% of the cases, and indeed in terms of the youth court they will only proceed through to the youth court where they are involved in a murder, manslaughter or an offence carrying a penalty of 14 years or more, which is the very, very significant sharp end of the offending, Mr Speaker. So indeed the fact that this report identifies that the family court would be well placed to have additional tools to help keep parents engaged, I think is a very important part of the report that I have certainly gleaned, and I can only hope that today I'm lucky enough to have my bill pulled from the ballot, Mr Speaker. That would be gratifying, because I think it would go to support exactly the sort of recommendations made in this document. Mr Speaker, one of the other real threads of information that I pulled from this report was so much of what we're dealing with actually falls outside of the court jurisdiction and is dealt with family, with community, with police and agencies outside of the youth court. and the family court. And Mr Speaker, if one thing we can glean from this report is the need for systemic efficiency, the need for stakeholders to collaborate, the need for all partners and all parties involved to be mindful that preventing offending is indeed something that we must be focused on. Mr Speaker, I could go on. This is an excellent report, and we should all take heed of these recommendations. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Mr Speaker.
Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I want to commend the work of the